Hello, and welcome to Fireside Audiobooks. If you're looking to escape the world for a little while, you have come to the right place. Today, we're reading a true classic, The Scottish Fairy Book by Elizabeth W Grierson. It's a collection that really captures the heart of folklore. It's whimsical, a little bit eerie, and totally captivating. If you enjoy these readings, please do hit the subscribe button to keep our fires burning. Now, get comfortable and get yourself a nice hot drink, and let's begin. The Scottish Fairy Book by Elizabeth W Grierson, with illustrations by Maurice Meredith Williams. Narrated by Liz S. The Wee Bannock. Some tell about their sweethearts, how they tirl them to the winnock, but I'll tell you a bonny tale about a good oatmeal bannock. There was once an old man and his wife who lived in a dear little cottage by the side of a burn. They were a very canty and contented couple, for they had enough to live on and enough to do. Indeed, they considered themselves quite rich, for besides their cottage and their garden, they possessed 2 sleek cows, 5 hens and a cock, an old cat and 2 kittens. The old man spent his time looking after the cows and the hens and the garden, while the old woman kept herself busy spinning. One day, just after breakfast, the old woman thought that she would like an oatmeal bannock for her supper that evening. So she took down her bakeboard and put on her girdle and baked a couple of fine cakes. And when they were ready, she put them down before the fire to harden. While they were toasting, her husband came in from the byre and sat down to take a rest in his great armchair. Presently, his eyes fell on the bannocks, and as they looked very good, he broke one through the middle and began to eat it. When the other bannock saw this, it determined that it should not have the same fate, so it ran across the kitchen and out of the door as fast as it could. And when the old woman saw it disappearing, she ran after it as fast as her legs would carry her, holding her spindle in one hand and her distaff in the other. But she was old and the bannock was young, and it ran faster than she did, and escaped over the hill behind the house. It ran and it ran and it ran until it came to a large, newly thatched cottage, and as the door was open, it took refuge inside and ran right across the floor to a blazing fire, which was burning in the first room that it came to. Now it chanced that this house belonged to a tailor, and he and his 2 apprentices were sitting cross-legged on the top of a big table by the window, sewing away with all their might, while the tailor's wife was sitting beside the fire, carding lint. When the wee bannock came trundling across the floor, all 3 tailors got such a fright that they jumped down from the table and hid behind the master's tailor's wife. "Hoot," she said, "what a set of cowards ye be! 'Tis but a nice wee bannock. Get hold of it and divide it between you, and I'll fetch you a drink of milk." So she jumped up with her lint and her lint cards, and the tailor jumped up with his great shears, and one apprentice grasped the line measure, while another took up the saucer full of pins, and they all tried to catch the wee bannock. But it dodged them around and round the fire, and at last it got safely out of the door and ran down the road with one of the apprentices after it, who tried to snip it in 2 with his shears. It ran too quickly for him, however, and at last he stopped and went back to the house, while the wee bannock ran on until it came to a tiny cottage by the roadside. It trundled in at the door, And there was a weaver sitting at his loom with his wife beside him, winding a clue of yarn. "What's that, Tibby?" said the weaver with a start as the little cake flew past him. "Oh!" cried she in delight, jumping to her feet. "'Tis a wee bannock. I wonder where it came from." "Dinna bother your head about that, Tibby," said her man, "but grip it, my woman, grip it." But it was not so easy to get hold of the wee bannock. It was in vain that the good wife threw her clue at it, and that the good man tried to chase it into a corner and knock it down with his shuttle. It dodged and turned and twisted like a thing bewitched till at last it flew out at the door again and vanished down the hill. "For all the world," as the old woman said, "like a new tarred sheep or a daft cow." In the next house that it came to, it found the good wife in the kitchen, kerning. She had just filled her quern, and there was still some cream standing in the bottom of her cream jar. "Come away, little bannock," she cried when she saw it. "Thou art come in just the nick of time, for I am beginning to feel hungry, and I'll have cakes and cream for my dinner." But the wee bannock hopped round to the other side of the quern, and the good wife after it. And she was in such a hurry that she nearly upset the quern, and by the time that she had put it right again, the wee bannock was out at the door and halfway down the brae to the mill. The miller was sifting meal in the trough, but he straightened himself up when he saw the little cake. "It's a sign of plenty when bannocks are running around with no one to look after them," he said, "but I like bannocks and cheese. So just come in, and I will give thee a night's lodging, and I will give thee a night's lodging." But the little bannock had no wish to be eaten up by the miller, so it turned and ran out of the mill, and the miller was so busy that he did not trouble himself to run after it. After this, it ran on and on and on, till it came to the smithy, and it popped in there to see what it could see. The smith was busy at the anvil making horseshoe nails, but he looked up as the wee bannock entered. "If there be one thing I'm fond of, it is a glass of ale and a well-toasted cake," he cried. "So come in by here, and welcome to ye." But as soon as the little bannock heard of the ale, it turned and ran out of the smithy as fast as it could, and the disappointed smith picked up his hammer and ran after it. And when he saw that he could not catch it, he flung his heavy hammer at it, and in the hope of knocking it down. But luckily for the little cake, he missed his aim. After this, the bannock came to a farmhouse with a great stack of peats standing at the back of it. In it went, and ran to the fireside. In this house the master had all the lint spread out on the floor, and was cloving it with an iron rod, while the mistress was heckling what he had already cloven. "Oh, Janet!" cried the good man in surprise. "Here comes in a little bannock. It looks rare and good to eat. I'll have one half of it." "And I'll have the other half," cried the good wife. "Hit it over the back with your cloving stick, Sandy, and knock it down. Quick, or it will be out at the door again." But the bannock played juke-about and dodged behind a chair. "Hoot!" cried Janet contemptuously, for she thought that her husband might easily have hit it, and she threw her heckle at it. But the heckle missed it, just as her husband's cloving rod had done, for it played juke-about again and flew out of the house. This time it ran up a burnside, till it came to a little cottage standing among the heather. Here the good wife was making porridge for the supper in a pot over the fire, and her husband was sitting in a corner plaiting ropes of straw with which to tie up the cow. "Oh, Jock, come here, cried the good wife. "Thou art aye crying for a little bannock for thy supper. Come here, hasty quick, and help me catch it." "Aye, aye," assented Jock, jumping to his feet and hurrying across the little room. "But where is it? I cannot see it." "There, man, there," cried his wife. "Under the chair. Run thou to that side. I'll keep to this." So Jock ran into the dark corner behind the chair, but in his hurry he tripped and fell, and the wee bannock jumped over him and flew laughing out at the door. Through the winds and up the hillside it ran, and over the top of the hill to a shepherd's cottage on the other side. The inmates were just sitting down to their porridge, and the good wife was scraping the pan. "Save us and help us," she exclaimed, stopping with the spoon halfway to her mouth. "There's a wee bannock come in to warm itself at our fireside." "Snack the door," cried the husband, "and we'll try to catch it. It would come in handy after the porridge." But the bannock did not wait until the door was sneckit. It turned and ran as fast as it could, and the shepherd and his wife and all the bairns ran after it with their spoons in their hands in hopes of catching it. And when the shepherd saw that it could run faster than they could, he threw his bonnet at it and almost struck it. But it escaped all these dangers, and soon it came to another house where the folk were just going to bed. The good man was half undressed, and the good wife was raking the cinders carefully out of the fire. "What's that?" said he, "for the bowl of broth that I had at supper time wasn't very big." "Catch it then," answered his wife, "and I'll have a bit too. Quick, quick, throw your coat over it, or it will be away." So the good man threw his coat right on the top of the little bannock and almost managed to smother it. But it struggled bravely and got out, breathless and hot from under it. Then it ran out into the grey light again, for night was beginning to fall, and the good man ran out after it without his coat. He chased it and chased it through the stackyard and across a field and in amongst a fine patch of whins. Then he lost it. And as he was feeling cold without his coat, he went home. As for the poor little bannock, it thought that it would creep under a whin bush and lie there till morning. But it was so dark that it never saw that there was a fox's hole there. So it fell down the fox's hole, and the fox was very glad to see it, for he had had no food for 2 days. "Oh, welcome, welcome," he cried, and he snapped it through the middle with his teeth, and that was the end of the poor wee bannock. And if a moral be wanted for this tale, here it is, that people should never be too uplifted or too cast down over anything, for all the good folk in the story thought that they were going to get the bannock, and lo and behold, the fox got it after all. The Elfin Knight. There is a lone moor in Scotland, which in times past was said to be haunted by an elfin knight. This knight was only seen at rare intervals, once in every 7 years or so. But the fear of him lay on all the country round, for every now and then someone would set out to cross the moor and would never be heard of again. And although men might search every inch of the ground, no trace of him would be found. And with a thrill of horror, the searching party would go home again, shaking their heads and whispering to one another that he had fallen into the hands of the dreaded knight. So, as a rule, the moor was deserted, for nobody dare pass that way, much less live there, and by it became the haunt of all sorts of wild animals which made their lairs there, as they found that they never were disturbed by mortal huntsmen. Now, in that same region lived 2 young earls, Earl St. Clair and Earl Gregory, who were such friends that they rode and hunted and fought together if need be. And as they were both very fond of the chase, Earl Gregory suggested one day that they should go a-hunting on the haunted moor in spite of the elfin king. Certes, I hardly believe in him at all, cried the young man with a laugh. Methinks 'tis but an old wife's tale to frighten the bairns withal, lest they go straying amongst the heather and lose themselves. And 'tis pity that such fine sport should be lost because we, two bearded men, pay heed to such gossip. But Earl St. Clair looked grave. "'Tis meddling with unchancy things," he answered, "and 'tis no bairn's tale that travellers have set out to cross that moor, who have vanished bodily and never mere been heard of. But it is, as thou sayest, a pity that so much good sport be lost, all because an elfin knight chooses to claim the land as his and make us mortals pay toll for the privilege of planting a foot upon it. I have heard tell, however, that one is safe from any power that the knight may have if one weareth the sign of the blessed Trinity. So let us bind that on our arm and ride forth without fear." Sir Gregory burst into a loud laugh at these words. "Dost thou think that I am one of the bairns?" he said. "First, to be frightened by an idle tale, and then to think that a leaf of clover will protect me. No, no, carry that sign if thou wilt. I will trust my good bow and arrow." But Earl St. Clair did not heed his companion's words, for he remembered how his mother had told him when he was a little lad at her knee that whoso carried the sign of the blessed Trinity need never fear any spell that might be thrown over him by warlock or witch, elf or demon. So he went out to the meadow and plucked a leaf of clover, which he bound on his arm with a silken scarf. Then he mounted his horse and rode with Earl Gregory to the desolate and lonely moorland. For some hours all went well, and in the heat of the chase the young men forgot their fears. Then suddenly both of them reined in their steeds and sat gazing in front of them with affrighted faces, for a horseman had crossed their track, and they both would fain have known who he was and whence he came. "By my troth, but he rideth in haste, whoever he may be," said Earl Gregory at last, "and though I have always thought that no steed on earth could match mine for swiftness, I reckon that for every league that mine goeth, his would go 7. Let us follow him and see from what part of the world he cometh." "The Lord forbid that thou shouldst stir thy horse's feet to follow him," said Earl St. Clair devoutly. "Why, man, 'tis the elfin knight. Canst thou not see that he doth not ride on solid ground, but flieth through the air? And that although he rideth in what seemeth a mortal steed, he is really carried by mighty pinions which cleave the air like those of a bird. Follow him, forsooth. It will be an evil day for thee when thou seekest to do that." But Earl St. Clair forgot that he carried a talisman which his companion lacked, that enabled him to see things as they really were, while the other's eyes were holden, and he was startled and amazed when Earl Gregory said sharply, "Thy mind hath gone mad over this elfin knight. I tell thee, he who passed was a goodly knight, clad in a green vesture and riding on a great black jennet, and because I love a gallant horseman and would fain learn his name and degree, I will follow him till I find him, even if it be at the world's end." And without another word he put spurs to his horse and galloped off in the direction which the mysterious stranger had taken, leaving Earl St. Clair alone upon the moorland, his fingers touching the sacred sign and his trembling lips muttering prayers for protection. For he knew that his friend had been bewitched, and he made up his mind, brave gentleman that he was, that he would follow him to the world's end, if need be, and try to deliver him from the spell that had been cast over him. Meanwhile, Earl Gregory rode on, ever following in the wake of the knight in green, over moor and burn and moss, till he came to the most desolate region that he had ever been in his life. where the wind blew cold as if from snowfields, and where the hoarfrost lay thick and white on the withered grass at his feet. And there, in front of him, was a sight from which mortal man might well shrink back in awe and dread, for he saw an enormous ring marked out on the ground, inside of which the grass, instead of being withered and frozen, was lush and rank and green, where hundreds of shadowy elfin figures were dancing, clad in loose transparent robes of dull blue, which seemed to curl and twist round their wearers like snaky wreaths of smoke. These weird goblins were shouting and singing as they danced, and waving their arms above their heads and throwing themselves about on the ground, for all the world as if they had gone mad. And when they saw Earl Gregory halt on his horse just outside the ring, they beckoned to him with their skinny fingers. "Come hither," they shouted. "Come, tread a measure with us, and afterwards we will drink to thee out of our monarch's loving cup." And, strange as it may seem, the spell that had been cast over the young earl was so powerful that, in spite of his fear, he felt that he must obey the eldritch summons, and he threw his bridle on his horse's neck and prepared to join them. But just then an old and grizzled goblin stepped out from among his companions and approached him. Apparently he dare not leave the charmed circle, for he stopped at the edge of it, and then, stooping down and pretending to pick up something, he whispered in a hoarse whisper, "I know not whom thou art, nor from whence thou comest, Sir Knight, but if thou lovest thy life, see to it that thou comest not within this ring, nor joinest with us in our feast, else wilt thou be forever undone." But Earl Gregory only laughed. "I vow that I would follow the Green Knight," he replied, "and I will carry out my vow, even if the venture leadeth me close to the nethermost world." And with these words he stepped over the edge of the circle, right in amongst the ghostly dancers. At his coming they shouted louder than ever, and danced more madly, and sang more lustily. Then all at once a silence fell upon them, and they parted into two companies, leaving a way through their midst, up which they signed to the earl to pass. He walked through their ranks till he came to the middle of the circle, and there, seated at a table of red marble, was the knight whom he had come so far to seek, clad in his grass-green robes, and before him on the table stood a wondrous goblet fashioned from an emerald and set round the rim with blood-red rubies. And this cup was filled with heather ale, which foamed up over the brim. And when the knight saw Sir Gregory, he lifted it from the table and handed it to him with a stately bow. And Sir Gregory, being very thirsty, drank. And as he drank, he noticed that the ale in the goblet never grew less, but ever foamed up to the edge. And for the first time his heart misgave him, and he wished that he had never set out on this strange adventure. But alas! the time for regrets had passed, for already a strange numbness was stealing over his limbs, and a chill pallor was creeping over his face, and before he could utter a single cry for help, the goblet dropped from his nerveless fingers, and he fell down before the elfin king like a dead man. Then a great shout of triumph went up from all the company, for if there was one thing which filled their hearts with joy, it was to entice some unwary mortal into their ring and throw their uncanny spell over him, so that he must needs spend long years in their company. But soon their shouts of triumphs began to die away, and they muttered and whispered to each other with looks of something like fear on their faces, for their keen ears heard a sound which filled their hearts with dread. It was the sound of human footsteps, which were so free and untrammelled that they knew at once that the stranger, whoever he was as yet untouched by any charm. And if this were so, he might work them ill and rescue their captive from them. And what they dreaded was true, for it was the brave Earl St. Clair who approached, fearless and strong because of the holy sign he bore. And as soon as he saw the charmed ring and the eldritch dancers, he was about to step over its magic border when the little grizzled goblin who had whispered to Earl Gregory came and whispered to him also. "Alas, alas!" he exclaimed with a look of sorrow on his wrinkled face. "Hast thou come as thy companion came, to play thy toll of years to the elfin king? Oh, if thou hast wife or child behind thee, I beseech thee, by all that thou holdest sacred, to turn back ere it be too late." "Who art thou, and from whence hast thou come?" asked the Earl, looking kindly down at the little creature in front of him. "I came from the country that thou hast come from," wailed the goblin, "for I was once a mortal man, even as thou. But I set out over the enchanted moor, and the elfin king appeared in the guise of a beauteous knight, and he looked so brave and noble and generous that I followed him hither and drank of his heather ale, and now I am doomed to bide here till 7 long years be spent. As for thy friend, Sir Earl, he too hath drunk of the accursed draught, and he now lieth as dead at our lawful monarch's feet. He will wake up, 'tis true, but it will be in such a guise as I wear, and to the bondage with which I am bound." "Is there naught that I can do to rescue him?" cried Earl St. Clair eagerly, "ere he taketh on him the elfin shape? I have no fear of the spell of his cruel captor, for I bear the sign of one who is stronger than he. Speak speedily, little man, for time presseth." "There is something that thou couldst do, Sir Earl," whispered the goblin, "but to essay it were a desperate attempt, for if thou failest, then could not even the power of the blessed sign save thee." "And what is that?" asked the Earl impatiently. "Thou must remain motionless," answered the old man, "in the cold and frost till dawn break and the hour cometh when they sing matins in the holy church. Then must thou walk slowly 9 times round the edge of the enchanted circle, and after that thou must walk boldly across it to the red marble table where sits the elfin king. On it thou wilt see an emerald goblet studded with rubies and filled with heather ale. That must thou secure and carry away. But whilst thou art doing so, let no word cross thy lips, for this enchanted ground whereon we dance may look solid to mortal eyes, but in reality it is not. 'Tis but a quaking bog, and under it is a great lake wherein dwelleth a fearsome monster, and if thou so much as utter a word while thy foot resteth upon it, thou wilt fall through the bog and perish in the waters beneath." So saying, the grisly goblin stepped back among his companions, leaving Earl St. Clair standing alone on the outskirts of the charmed ring. There he waited, shivering with cold through the long, dark hours, till the grey dawn began to break over the hilltops, and, with its coming, the elfin forms before him seemed to dwindle and fade away. And at the hour when the sound of the matin bell came softly pealing from across the moor, he began his solemn walk. Round and round the ring he paced, keeping steadily on his way, although loud murmurs of anger like distant thunder rose from the elfin shades, and even the very ground seemed to heave and quiver as if it would shake this bold intruder from its surface. But through the power of the blessed sign on his arm, Earl St. Clair went on unhurt. When he had finished pacing round the ring, He stepped boldly onto the enchanted ground and walked across it. And what was his astonishment to find that all the ghostly elves and goblins whom he had seen were lying frozen into tiny blocks of ice, so that he was sore put to it to walk amongst them without treading upon them. And as he approached the marble table, the very hairs rose on his head at the sight of the elfin king sitting behind it, stiff and stark like his followers, while in front of him lay the form of Earl Gregory, who had shared the same fate. Nothing stirred, save two coal-black ravens who sat, one on either side of the table, as if to guard the emerald goblet, flapping their wings and croaking hoarsely. When Earl St. Clair lifted the precious cup, they rose in the air and circled round his head, screaming with rage and threatening to dash it from his hands with their claws, while the frozen elves and even their mighty king himself stirred in their sleep and half sat up, as if to lay hands on this presumptuous intruder. But the power of the holy sign restrained them, else had Earl St. Clair been foiled in his quest. As he retraced his steps, awesome and terrible were the sounds that he heard around him. The ravens shrieked and the frozen goblins screamed, and up from the hidden lake below came the sound of the deep breathing of the awful monster who was lurking there, eager for prey. But the brave Earl heeded none of these things, but kept steadily onwards, trusting in the might of the sign he bore. And it carried him safely through all the dangers. And just as the sound of the matin bell was dying away in the morning air, he stepped on to solid ground once more, and flung the enchanted goblet from him. And lo, every one of the frozen elves vanished, along with their king and his marble table, and nothing was left on the rank green grass save Earl Gregory, who slowly woke from his enchanted slumber and stretched himself and stood up, shaking in every limb. He gazed vaguely round him, as if he scarce remembered where he was. And when, after Earl St. Clair had run to him and had held him in his arms till his senses returned, and the warm blood coursed through his veins, the two friends returned to the spot where Earl St. Clair had thrown down the wondrous goblet, they found nothing but a piece of rough grey whinstone, with a drop of dew hidden in a little crevice which was hollowed in its side.